There will be hard times ahead. That's according to Vladimir Putin. Yes, amid recession warnings from the Russian government, the Prime Minister called for Russia to be self-reliant. Joining me down the line to discuss is Chris Waefer. Chris, in his address to Parliament, Putin said we have huge internal market and resources, capable, intelligent people. But this shift isn't going to happen overnight. And which areas are going to be the most hurt in the interim, do you think?
Well, as you say, it's certainly nothing is going to happen overnight. This is something that Russia should have been focusing on for the last 10 years, but instead has been living sort of well on the back of rising oil wealth and avoiding any tough decisions or hard choices. And to some extent, if you like, the chickens come home to roost now, and has exposed, to the sort of weaknesses in the economy and Russia's over-reliance on imported goods, even in basic goods such as food and medicine. So the positive thing from this crisis is that the government at least is now likely to start focusing on this issue of reducing import reliance and maybe putting money into areas that can result in more manufacturing and the self-reliance he talked about. We do know already that the mantra in government over the last few months and expected over the next few years is import substitution.
In theory, the ruble's movements should be good news for Russia, but that doesn't seem to be the case just now, does it?
Well, it is good news in one respect, in that the weaker ruble has completely protected the budget, and it has provided something of a soft stimulus for the manufacturing sector. Now, the budget is very important because even though the finance minister has been making headlines saying that Russia is losing over $100 billion from the falling oil price, which of course is mathematically correct, but the ruble has fallen faster. It means that the budget is making more money in ruble terms despite the lower oil price this year, and therefore the federal budget remains in surplus. So it mitigates some of the decline in the economy in other areas. And also the weaker ruble has helped create some better demand for Russian goods. It's cut the demand for increasingly expensive foreign goods. That's helped the trade balance, which is up 11% in the first 3 months of this year, mainly because of imports falling. And there's been some increased demand for domestic goods.
After deciding to, in effect, allow the ruble to float, there were claims earlier in the week that the central bank had intervened. What did you make of the moves?
The central bank has moved to within one step of a full free float, but it's still intervening occasionally over the last week or so. And again, that's keeping some speculative pressure on the ruble. The central bank needs to completely move to a free float to avoid that and to preserve its savings. And preserving the savings is definitely a high priority for the government because the rating agencies have made very clear that the only reason Russia is holding on to its investment grade is because the level of reserves remain high. If the central bank would start burning through those reserves to protect the currency, then Russia's investment grade would go to junk status, and that, of course, would make recovery a whole lot more difficult even when this crisis ends.
Inflation is the #1 problem for the Kremlin. Now, it was hoped that the figure had peaked at 7.5%, and some are expecting inflation to moderate in 2015. But given the impact of sanctions and associated credit flows, is this too optimistic?
Well, the current rate of inflation is already at 9.5% year on year. We calculate that because food price inflation is definitely going to go higher through the winter as sort of domestic produced goods, food become less available because as the winter takes hold. And again, Russia has not invested money on storage mechanisms or efficient delivery systems to kind of keep summer produce, as it were, available through the year. It just doesn't happen because it's never been necessary. They've just imported everything. So that part of the infrastructure is missing. Therefore, food prices will rise and there will be some shortages through the winter. And because of that, primarily, and the weak ruble, we expect that inflation will rise 12, 13, or maybe even 14%, but certainly 12 to 13%, I think, looks inevitable coming into the late winter and the spring. So, the previous optimism that inflation could be controlled at 7 or 8%, that's completely gone. At this stage, it's a case of how high up into the low teens it goes before it peaks, and then the hope is that it will peak at that level. But clearly, that will depend on where the ruble trades, and it will depend on a lot of other factors.
Chris, great to speak with you. Thank you. Well, that's all from me for the moment, but the TV team has plenty more coming your way, so please stay with us here at Dukascope TV.